The ocean was louder than I remembered. Waves slammed into the shore with a rhythm that felt almost impatient, like the sea was reminding me that I didn't belong here. Still, I dropped my backpack onto the sand and spread my towel, forcing myself to sit. I'd driven nearly 2 hours just to be here, away from everything. The noise of home, the texts I didn't answer, the questions I didn't want to face. I told myself I came for peace. But peace didn't come easily. The beach wasn't crowded, not this early. A few families clustered near the pier, their laughter carrying thinly across the wind. Closer to the waves, I saw the real reason this stretch of coastline had always been someone else's territory: the surfers. I'd never understood how they did it, how they moved so fearlessly into water that made me hesitate at ankle depth. Their boards sliced through the foam, their bodies bent low and steady, like the ocean trusted them. That's when I noticed him. He was farther out than the rest, straddling his board with a kind of stillness that made him stand out. Most of the others fidgeted or shouted to each other between waves, but he was quiet, focused, waiting. His hair, darkened by salt water, clung in wet curls that brushed against his forehead. The sun caught the drops sliding down his shoulders, lighting him in a way that made my stomach twist. I told myself I was only watching because he was good, better than the others at least. When he finally rose to his feet and caught a wave, his balance seemed effortless, like he'd grown up with the tide teaching him its secrets. His arms stretched slightly, body leaning into the water's curve, and for a moment it looked less like sport and more like surrender. When the wave dissolved, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I shook my head, laughing softly at myself. I was ridiculous. He was just another surfer. Another stranger. Except he wasn't. Later, when I wandered closer to the shore, sun, the water cool against my calves, I saw him coming in. He dragged his board through the shallows, droplets scattering off his skin. His chest rose and fell heavily, muscles tightening with each step. I told myself not to look, not to make it obvious. But I did. And then he caught me. His eyes lifted from the sand to mine, and the world seemed to stutter. It wasn't just a glance. Not the casual look you give when you happen to notice someone in your direction. His gaze locked onto me, steady and unflinching, like he'd been waiting for me to look back. I froze. My first instinct was to glance away, pretend I hadn't been staring, but something in the intensity of his eyes pinned me there. The corners of his mouth shifted upward, not quite a smile but not nothing either. A knowing curve, like he understood exactly what had just passed between us. My heart beat harder than it should have. I finally broke eye contact, pretending to adjust the cuff of my hoodie, pretending the heat rushing to my face was from the wind. When I looked up again, he was still watching. Not in a confrontational way, more curious, like I was a puzzle he hadn't seen before. And then, slowly, he turned back toward the dunes, his board tucked under his arm. I stayed there, standing ankle-deep in the water, until he disappeared beyond the curve of the sand. The waves crashed at my feet, but I barely heard them. It was stupid, I told myself. Just a surfer. Just a look. He probably stared at everyone. Maybe I only imagined it lasted longer than it had. But the truth was, I couldn't shake it. The way he looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, left something unsettled in my chest. Like the tide had shifted beneath my feet without warning. Like the beach wasn't just mine anymore. I wrapped my arms around myself, but the shiver that ran through me had nothing to do with the wind. The tide was lower the next afternoon, gentler, almost inviting. I told myself I'd only wade in far enough to feel the pull of the waves against my legs, nothing more. Swimming had never been my thing, but sometimes I liked pretending the ocean could wash things off me, the heaviness I carried, the thoughts that followed me no matter how far I drove. The water was cold, sharp against my skin, and I shivered as I walked in until it reached my waist. I tried to stand steady, but the sand shifted beneath my feet, soft and unstable. It felt like the ground itself could vanish if I stopped paying attention. That's when it happened. A wave rolled in bigger than I'd expected. It hit me square in the chest, stronger than I was ready for. My footing slipped, my arms flailed, and suddenly I was under. The salt water stung my nose, rushed into my ears. Panic surged through me, I couldn't find balance, couldn't get my footing back. And then, suddenly, a hand grabbed mine. Firm. Steady. Pulling me upward, grounding me before I slipped further. Hey, a voice said, calm but strong. I've got you. The ocean roared around us, but that voice cut through. I blinked against the water, coughing, and there he was. The surfer. Jameson. His grip tightened as he steadied me, guiding me back toward the shallows. My pulse hammered, though I wasn't sure if it was from nearly going under or from the fact that he was holding me. His fingers wrapped around mine like he had no intention of letting go until he was certain I was safe. We reached the sandbar, the water lower now barely to my knees. Only then did he release me, slowly, as though he wanted to be sure I wouldn't disappear again. "You okay?" he asked, his brows drawn tight, drops of water clinging to his lashes. I nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah. Just wasn't paying attention." My voice cracked, betraying me. He smiled then, small but genuine. "Happens to everyone. Ocean's tricky like that. She doesn't care if you're ready." I tried to laugh it off, though it came out thin. "Guess I'm not built for it." His eyes flicked over me, lingering just a second too long before he shook his head. "Doesn't mean you don't belong out here." Something in the way he said it, quiet, certain, made my chest tighten. I didn't know what to say back. So I just stood there, dripping and shivering, while he stood close enough that our shoulders almost touched. We walked back toward shore together, our strides uneven in the sand. Once our arms brushed. Once again. Neither of us pulled away immediately, though I shifted a step to the side after the second time, pretending it was just the water pushing me. Still, I could feel the ghost of his hand on mine, the way he'd held me so firmly, like I mattered. Like it wasn't just instinct but intention. On the towel, when I finally sat down, my heart was still racing. Jameson dropped his board onto the sand a few feet away, shaking his wet hair back. He didn't say much, didn't have to. His presence was loud enough. And when his eyes flicked to mine again, briefly but somberly, I felt that same unsettled rush in my chest. It was too close to be nothing. Too close to ignore. After that, it was like he'd decided we were spending the afternoon together. Jameson settled on the sand not far from me, lowering himself onto his board first, then onto the ground, stretching out like the beach belonged to him. His presence felt intentional, though he never asked if it was okay. And I didn't tell him it wasn't. I pretended to scroll through my phone, though there was no service. Pretended to be absorbed by the horizon, though I was painfully aware of him in the corner of my vision. Every shift of his body, every breath he drew, it all pulled at me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just the ocean crashing steady, the seagulls overhead, the wind tugging at the edges of my towel. Silence stretched between us, thick but not uncomfortable. If anything, it was alive. Like something unsaid was building with every passing second. Eventually he broke it. "Do you come here a lot?" he asked, his voice softer than I expected. I shook my head. "Not really. I just needed space." He tilted his head, considering me. Space from what? The question caught me off guard. I swallowed, fumbling for an answer. "Everything, I guess." He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did. He didn't push further. Instead, he leaned back on his elbows, watching the waves like the conversation hadn't left an echo inside me. Minutes passed. The sun dipped lower, painting streaks of gold across the water. I tried not to let my eyes linger on him, but it was impossible. The way his hair curled damply against his temples. The curve of his jaw. The steady rise and fall of his chest. And then he looked back. Our eyes caught and held, and I froze. I could have looked away, but I didn't. Something about the weight of his gaze rooted me there. It wasn't invasive, but it wasn't casual either. It was searching, like he wanted to see something more than what I gave to strangers. I opened my mouth, ready to break the tension with some joke, but no words came. My throat tightened. All I could do was hold his gaze until it became too much, and I let my eyes fall to the sand. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me out. He just let the silence sit, thick and heavy but somehow safe. After a while his voice came again, quiet. "You don't have to fight the water, you know?" I looked up, confused. He gestured toward the waves, his expression thoughtful. "If you let it, it carries you. Fighting just makes it worse." I wasn't sure if he meant the ocean or if he meant me. Either way, the words landed deeper than they should have. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to tell him that I didn't know how to stop fighting, not with the water, not with myself. But the words stuck, and instead I just nodded faintly, pretending to understand. He turned back toward the horizon, his profile sharp against the fading light. The silence returned, but now it was different. Denser. Like something had cracked open between us, and we both knew it but weren't ready to name it. I hugged my knees to my chest, staring out at the same waves he was watching, my heartbeat thudding too loudly in my ears. There was something in the silence. And it scared me how much I wanted to stay in it with him. By the time the sun started dipping toward the horizon, the air had cooled enough that I pulled my hoodie tighter around me. Jameson, on the other hand, didn't seem bothered. He'd slipped on a thin t-shirt, still damp in places from the ocean, and it clung to him in a way that made it difficult not to notice every detail of his frame. We ended up walking. I'm not sure how it happened. Maybe he suggested it, maybe I just fell into step beside him, But soon we were moving along the shore, Jameson together. His board rested under one arm, his other hand swinging loosely at his side. The water rushed in, curling around our ankles as we walked. Every so often, his shoulder brushed mine, and I'd tell myself it was just the narrow strip of wet sand forcing us close. Still, I didn't step away. At one point, the tide rolled higher than expected, a sudden swell crashing up to our thighs. The current shoved hard against me and I stumbled, unsteady. Before I could fall, his hand was there. Quick, instinctive, but firm. His fingers curled around my wrist, steadying me, pulling me closer to him. For a split second, our bodies nearly collided. I should have laughed it off, thanked him, shaken the moment loose. But I didn't. Neither of us did. His hand stayed on my wrist, warm against my chilled skin, holding me longer than necessary. Long enough that my pulse betrayed me, hammering under his fingertips. I wondered if he could feel it, if he noticed the way I was suddenly too aware of everything. The scent of salt in his hair, the way his breath slowed as he looked at me. When he finally let go, it wasn't abrupt. His touch slipped away, almost Jameson, like he wanted me to feel the absence as much as the contact itself. We kept walking after that, but the space between us had changed. Every step felt weighted, charged with the memory of his hand. Neither of us mentioned it. We talked about small things, how long he'd been surfing, how unpredictable this stretch of coastline was, but my attention kept circling back to that moment. The touch that had lingered too long. The touch that stayed even after it was gone. Later, when the sky deepened into violet and the first stars began to appear, we stopped near a cluster of rocks. He set his board down and we sat there side by side, our knees brushing occasionally as we watched the tide pull back. "You're quiet," he said softly after a while. I swallowed, my throat dry. "I'm just thinking. About almost getting dragged out earlier?" His tone was light, teasing, but his eyes were searching. "About a lot of things," I admitted. He didn't press. Just nodded, turning his gaze back to the horizon. His shoulder brushed mine again, this time without apology, and I let it stay. We sat like that for a long time, the silence filled only by the rhythm of the waves. My wrist still tingled faintly where he'd held me. It was ridiculous, I knew, but the truth was undeniable. The touch hadn't just steadied me. It had unsettled me, cracked something open I wasn't sure I was ready to face. When I finally lay down that night, the image replayed again and again. His hand closing around mine in the water, his fingers pressing against my pulse, the look in his eyes when he finally let go. The ocean had pulled at me earlier, dragging me under, leaving me breathless. But Jameson's hand, that was the pull I couldn't escape. The touch that stayed. The morning after felt different. The beach was quieter, the crowd from the weekend gone, and the horizon stretched out in a kind of muted calm. I thought maybe Jameson wouldn't be there, that yesterday had been some strange, fleeting pocket of connection I'd imagined too much into. But when I walked down toward the rocks, he was already sitting there. Legs dangling over the edge, board propped behind him, he skimmed a stone across the surface of a tide pool. It skipped twice before sinking, sending little ripples outward. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, his expression softened in a way that made my chest tighten. "You came back," he said simply. "Guess I did." My voice cracked, so I sat beside him quickly, hoping the sound of the ocean would swallow it. For a while we just sat there, the sun warming our shoulders. I traced shapes in the wet sand with my fingertip, trying not to glance too much at his profile. Then he spoke, quiet, almost to himself. "This doesn't feel like nothing." My head snapped toward him before I could stop myself. "What?" He shifted, finally meeting my eyes. "This. Sitting here. Yesterday. The way you looked at me. The way I—" He broke off, exhaling hard, shaking his head as if he'd said too much already. My pulse raced. I could have laughed it off, made a joke, pretended I didn't understand. That was usually my instinct, to shrink from things too close to the truth. But I couldn't this time. Not with him looking at me like that, open and uncertain all at once. "You're right," I said, the words tumbling out before I could think better of them. My voice came out low, shaky. "It doesn't feel like nothing." The silence that followed was heavy, but not the uncomfortable kind. It pressed in, filling the space between us with something we'd both been circling around since the first look on the sand. His gaze flicked down briefly, to my mouth maybe, or maybe I only imagined it, then back to my eyes. The world narrowed to just that look, to the rush of blood in my ears, to the thought that maybe I wasn't the only one holding something back. I swallowed hard. "I don't even know what this is," I admitted. "But I can't pretend I don't feel it." Jameson's lips curved, not into a grin but something smaller, more vulnerable. "Yeah. Same." Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us leaned away. We just sat there letting the words hang raw and undeniable. At one point his hand brushed against mine on the rock. It wasn't James somberate, at least it didn't seem to be. But I didn't move. Neither did he. Our fingers stayed there, grazing, almost touching like we were both holding our breath. The sound of the waves filled the silence we didn't know how to break. My chest ached with the weight of it, with the thought that maybe this wasn't just in my head, maybe this was something real. When he finally pulled his hand back, it wasn't abrupt. Gentle, hesitant, like he was as unsure as I was. But the space between us had changed. What if this was real? The question echoed in my head long after I left the rocks, long after I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling of my rented room. What if this was real, and I couldn't ignore it anymore? The next evening I found him on the sand with his board half buried, carving little shapes in the wet ground with a stick. He looked up as I approached, his face breaking into a grin that felt brighter than the fading sun. "You again?" he teased. "Guess I can't stay away," I said, trying for casual, though my stomach flipped at how true it felt. He stood, brushing the sand from his hands. "Come on. You've been watching from the shore too long. Time for a lesson." Before I could protest, he was pressing his surfboard into my hands. The thing was heavier than I expected, awkward under my arm. "I don't even know how to stand on this," I said. "That's why I'm here," he replied, stepping closer. "You trust me?" I hesitated, not because of the board but because of the way his eyes held mine when he asked. There was something layered in his tone, something I wasn't ready to name. Still I nodded. "Yeah, I guess I do." He showed me how to position my feet, how to crouch low, how to balance. It was clumsy at first, my stance wobbly, my arms flailing. He laughed, steadying me with a hand at my elbow, another at my back. "Bend your knees, not your spine," he said. "Here, like this." His touch lingered longer than it had to, and I felt the warmth of it even through my hoodie. When I finally tipped sideways, nearly toppling, he caught me again. I shoved him lightly in embarrassment, muttering, "You're enjoying this way too much." "Of course I am," he shot back, grinning. "You're terrible at it." I laughed harder than I expected, and something about the sound surprised me, like I hadn't realized how long it had been since laughter came that easily. We ended up sitting on the sand after that, the board lying forgotten behind us. Our shoulders touched, not by accident this time, and neither of us moved away. The moon had risen higher, silver light rippling across the waves. He leaned closer, his voice softer now. "You're different out here. Calmer." I blinked, caught off guard. Different from what? From the guy who showed up on the beach looking like he wanted the world to forget him. His words weren't harsh, but they were uncomfortably true. I opened my mouth, but no reply came. He wasn't wrong. I had come here to disappear, to lose myself in the noise of the sea. I hadn't expected someone else to notice. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. His shoulder pressed lightly into mine, grounding me. I turned my head slightly, and that's when it happened. His forehead brushed mine. It was so small, so Jameson-Kate, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then he didn't pull away. He stayed there, breath warm against my cheek, his closeness radiating through me. My chest tightened, but not from panic. From something else, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it was right there. I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle. No words. No labels. Just his presence pressed against mine, steady and quiet. I didn't know I was waiting for this, waiting to feel seen, to feel held without being touched, to feel like maybe I wasn't the only one drowning beneath the surface. When he finally pulled back, it was slow, reluctant. His eyes searched mine as though waiting for me to run, to deny it. But I didn't. I just whispered, "Thank you." For what? I wasn't sure. For teaching me to balance, for pulling me from the water, for not looking away when I couldn't find words. For being here. He smiled faintly, and the quiet between us thickened again, but this time it felt safe. Like something had been given permission to exist. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The night belonged to the silence, to the closeness, to the weight of something neither of us had asked for but neither of us wanted to lose. And as the waves curled endlessly along the shore, I realized, I hadn't known I was waiting for this. But now that it was here, I couldn't imagine letting it go. Morning came quietly. The air was cooler, edged with the kind of sharpness that comes before the day fully wakes. The horizon glowed faint pink, the sun still hidden but promising its arrival. I walked down the wooden steps toward the beach, coffee in hand, the sand damp beneath my shoes. Jameson was already there. He sat cross-legged on his towel, a paper cup balanced between his palms, staring out at the tide. His board lay in the sand beside him, striped with salt. He looked almost smaller in the dawn light, softer, like the weight he carried wasn't his to hold yet. When he noticed me, his face broke into something easy. Not a grin, not even a smile, just a quiet shift that said he was glad I'd come. I lowered myself onto the sand next to him, brushing the grains from my hoodie. "You're up early." He shrugged, his eyes still on the water. "Couldn't sleep. Ocean's better company than a ceiling." I huffed a laugh, sipping from my cup. "Yeah, I get that." For a while we just sat there, letting the silence settle between us. It wasn't the heavy, searching silence of yesterday. It was lighter, easier, like the waves themselves had given us permission to breathe. At one point his knee brushed mine. He didn't move it and neither did I. It was such a small thing, but it grounded me more than the sand beneath us. After a long stretch he spoke, his voice low. "Yesterday felt different." I swallowed, fingers tightening around my cup. "Yeah." He turned his head toward me then, and for a moment, it felt like the whole beach narrowed down to just his gaze. "Steady, gentle, unafraid." "I don't know what this is," he admitted, "but I don't want to pretend it's nothing." My throat tightened. I'd been waiting for him to say it, maybe longer than I realized. "Me neither," I whispered. Something shifted then. He didn't lean closer, didn't reach for me, but his hand slid into the sand between us, palm up, open. An invitation without words. I hesitated only a second before setting my hand into his. Our fingers fit together like the simplest thing in the world. No rush, no force, just quiet belonging. The warmth of his palm seeped into mine, and I realized how long it had been since I let myself be held, even in something this small. We stayed like that as the sun rose higher, painting gold across the waves. At one point he chuckled softly. "You know, you've got the worst surf stance I've ever seen." I groaned. "Seriously? You're bringing that up now?" His grin widened. "I'm just saying, if we're going to spend more time out here, I'll have to fix that." The way he said it, "if we're going to spend more time out here," sent a quiet warmth through me. Not a promise exactly, but the suggestion of one. "Guess I'll have to let you," I said, my voice lighter than it had been in days. He squeezed my hand once, gently, before letting go to sip his coffee. The absence was noticeable, but it didn't feel final. It felt like something we could come back to. When the sun finally broke free of the horizon, flooding the sand in bright light, we both stood. He stretched, his shirt riding up slightly, and I looked away before he caught me staring. "You leaving today?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with something else. "Yeah. Gotta head back." He nodded, kicking at the sand with his bare foot. "Right." We stood there for a moment, the kind of pause that could have broken either way, into distance or into something more. I thought about saying it outright, about asking for his number, about confessing that I didn't want this to be the last time. But the words felt too heavy in the morning air. Instead I just said, "Thanks." "For what?" His brow furrowed. "For pulling me out of the water. For teaching me how not to break my spine on your board. I trailed off, shaking my head. "Just, thanks." His expression softened. "Anytime." We started walking back toward the steps together, the sand cool between our toes. When we reached the edge of the dunes, he touched my arm lightly, halting me. "Hey," he said, almost a whisper. "Whatever this is, I'm glad it happened." I met his eyes, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel like running. "Me too," I said. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. But when he lifted his hand in a small wave and I lifted mine back, it felt like something had been set in motion. Something fragile, maybe fleeting, but real. As I climbed the steps, I looked back once. He was still there, standing in the sand, board under his arm, the sunlight catching on the water behind him. I didn't expect it. I didn't ask for it. But I wouldn't undo it for anything. Whatever this becomes.